He would dress up as a clown for children, but no one knew he had 27 bodies underneath his home. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17th of 1942 in Chicago. The household that he grew up in was not good at all because his father, who was a World War II veteran, would constantly beat him. At the age of 11, John had a playground accident, and this led him with a blood clot in his brain, and this would trigger blackouts. He seemed to be always socially isolated, and he always wanted approval from his father. By 1966, John turned his life around. He got married, had 2 stepchildren, and even owned a KFC franchise. To everyone around John, he seemed to be charming, always ready to lend a hand, but this was all a front. That same year, John had lured a teenage boy to his home and SA'd him. When that teenage boy tried to report the crime, John hired another teenager to go and beat him up. Despite those efforts, the case moved forward and John pled guilty and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Out of those 10 years, he only served 18 months. While in prison, John became the head cook and he charmed the prison staff and they gave him early parole. His wife ended up divorcing him, his father passed away, and he wasn't allowed to go to his funeral. In 1970, he returned to Chicago with a clean slate, but he had some sinister plans. In 1972, John remarried and moved into a small home in Norwood Park. He launched a contracting business called PDM Contractors and focused on hiring teen boys. Most of these teenage boys came from broken homes, were runaways, all were vulnerable. From the outside looking in, John seemed like a great neighbor. He would always host barbecues. He would even dress up as a clown and go to children's hospitals to cheer up children, but no one knew that he was making a torture chamber. On December 11th of 1978, 15-year-old Robert Piest vanished after his shift at a pharmacy. He told his mom he was going to speak with a contractor about a job, but he never returned home. Detectives were called and police showed up at John's home. John denied ever meeting Robert, but once they did a background check on him, it showed his previous conviction. Once they got a search warrant to search his home, they found IDs from missing boys. They found a book called Pretty Boys Must Die, handcuffs, clothing, and a high school class ring from one of the missing boys. There was a crawl space in the home and it reeked, but John claimed it was just the sewage. Once they checked the crawl space, they found human remains. Police recovered 27 bodies underneath his home, 1 was in the yard, and 5 more were in a nearby river. John would lure victims with promises of alcohol, work, or clown tricks. John would use chloroform to knock them out. He would torture them, SA them, and strangle them. He would bury them underneath his floorboards, put on a smile, dress up as a clown, and go to children's hospitals. On February 6 of 1980, John's trial began and his defense claimed insanity. Finally, on March 13th, after 2 hours of deliberation, he was found guilty and sentenced to death.
The mother that shot her daughter's killer during his trial. On the morning of March 5th, 1980, after a fight with her mother, 7-year-old Anna decided that she was going to skip school. Anna was an independent second grader and would often walk around the neighborhood alone. She would occasionally go to her neighbor's house, 35-year-old Klaus, to play with his cats, which is exactly what Anna did that morning instead of going to school. What 7-year-old Anna didn't know was that Klaus had a criminal history that included SAing multiple children and the attempted unaliving of a 6-year-old girl. Klaus was released following something, and I don't know how much of this I can say, so I'm going to put it on the screen now, pause to read. Klaus held Anna captive for hours before he unalived her and then confessed everything to his fiancée, who thankfully turned him in. During the first few days of Klaus's trial, Anna's mother Marianne sat front row, really hysterical, screaming at Klaus. Day 3 of Klaus's trial, Marianne came in wearing a big coat that hid a Beretta that she had snuck into the courtroom and then fired the Beretta at Klaus 7 times, unaliving him. Marianne then surrendered and was arrested right then and there. Public was really split about their perception of Marianne. On one hand, she had a lot of supporters that saw this as vigilante justice of a mother and were confused why she was arrested at all. While others felt like Marianne wasn't a good mother to Anna, said that her guilt didn't seem authentic and questioned her motives for doing what she did. Some would go on to say that after gaining all these supporters and attention, Marianne kind of basked in the fame, and that people that knew Marianne said that she didn't really take care of Anna at all. Anna would sleep on benches outside and wander around the city by herself constantly. Ultimately, Marianne was convicted, but I think the judge was on her side a lot because she was released after serving 3 years. But what do you think? Do you think Marianne was justified? Do you think this is a case of a loving mother getting revenge, or a mother who never cared until it was too late? Make sure to leave all your thoughts, theories, questions, and case suggestions in the comments.
My hairstylist totally threw me off the other day. Mid-shampoo, he just suddenly said to me, "Oh, you must have seen that woman who got pulled over with 2 dead children in the boot of her car, didn't you?" I was like, I'm confused, I'm disoriented, tell me everything. This all started in July 2021 during a routine traffic stop about 8 miles away from Baltimore. This woman just randomly got pulled over in her car, and thank God she did. This was 36-year-old Nicole Johnson, and as the officers were like, "Step out of the vehicle, can you tell us your name please?" They smelt this awful odor, and one of the officers actually said this was the unmistakable odor of decomposition. So they asked Nicole to open the boot of her car, and inside was like something from a horror film. There was a suitcase inside. And when they opened this suitcase, there was just something I don't think I could ever imagine seeing in my life. Officers found inside that suitcase was the body of a 7-year-old girl. This was actually Nicole's niece, Jocelyn. But that's not where the story ends, because there was another bag in that same boot. This time it was a slightly smaller bag, and inside, you've guessed it, a slightly smaller body. This was Nicole's little nephew, 5-year-old Larry. Now, obviously, they immediately arrested this woman and took her in for questioning. And honestly, what she said during her police interrogation was absolutely unbelievable. She said she'd been looking after these children on behalf of her sister since 2019, so 2 years. Now, the sister ended up claiming that she had tried to get her kids back off her sister, but she'd been unsuccessful. Nicole claimed in this police interview that in May 2020, she'd been staying in a hotel with herself and the niece and nephew. She said that the little child, the little girl, tried to get into the fridge. So I'm presuming by that she was hungry, and so Nicole hit her. Nicole's story is that the little girl then fell back, hit her head, and died. And instead of getting any kind of medical attention, she decided to just put her body in a suitcase. She then claimed, I told you this was unbelievable, she then claimed that the little boy had some kind of medical emergency and also died, so she decided to just put his body in a bag too. Honestly, it's just unbelievable the way that she tried to make out like this was all just a random accident. She did ultimately plead guilty to 2 counts of first-degree child abuse, and she was thankfully sentenced to 50 years in prison.
She hired a hit against her parents so she could be with her dealer boyfriend. This is the Pan family case from the new Netflix documentary What Jennifer Did, summarized in less than 3 minutes, so full spoilers ahead. Jennifer's parents, Han and Bick, were immigrants, and they worked really hard for everything they had, so they had pretty high expectations for their children. One thing I don't think the Netflix doc really dived enough into was just how controlling and strict Han and Bick were, but I really do think it was out of love and wanting great things for their children. But their daughter Jennifer was not the kind of student that they were hoping for. Her grades in high school were average at best and failing at worst. So Jennifer would create fake report cards with straight A's to show her parents. Jennifer actually must have been a Photoshop wizard because she faked everything, diplomas, acceptance letters, you name it. So by the time Jennifer's in her early 20s, her parents think that she graduated high school straight A's, got early admission into college on a full scholarship, graduated college with honors, and was working at a hospital. But in reality, Jennifer had never even graduated high school, let alone attended college, and was dating a substance dealer, Daniel Wong. Jennifer's web of lies started to unravel, and her parents were learning just how much of a liar their daughter was, and they were pissed, especially about her relationship with Daniel. Jennifer's parents didn't want her dating at all, but especially not a criminal like Daniel. They thought that Jennifer was better than that, and her father told her, "You can date him when I'm dead." And Jennifer took that literally. Daniel actually ended up breaking up with Jennifer because he felt like the relationship was more drama than it was actually worth, and this sent Jennifer over the edge. She had to be with Daniel, even if that meant getting rid of her parents. So with Daniel's help, Jennifer hired 3 hitmen, Leonard, Eric, and David, to take out her parents. So on November 8th, 2010, Jennifer would let those 3 men into her home who would shoot her parents multiple times. Jennifer's mother, Bick, had no idea that her daughter was involved, and her last words were actually, "Don't hurt my daughter." It's like heart-shattering. Jennifer then called 911 and told them that men came in to rob them but ended up shooting her parents. Thankfully, Jennifer's father, Han, survived but was in a coma. From the start, investigators were confused about Jennifer's story because it really didn't make any sense. And at the same time they start cracking down on Jennifer, her father wakes up from his coma and confirms that his daughter was involved. All of this because they didn't want their daughter dating a substance dealer. Jennifer and her co-conspirators all received life in prison except Eric, who took a plea deal and got 18 years, but he did ultimately end up passing away in prison not long after. As of just last year, Jennifer and the rest of her co-conspirators' convictions were overturned and they were all awarded free trials. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they offered them all plea deals to avoid going to trial again, but what do you think? Make sure to leave all your thoughts, theories, questions, and case suggestions in the comments for me.
Why would someone even think about killing all 5 of their babies? I'll tell you why. Because she thought that they were going to burn in hell, and by killing them, that solves the problem. I mean, she waited for her husband to leave the house because she knew he'd stop her. She fills the tub up, and one by one, she takes Paul, Luke, and John, strips their life away, and then lays them on a bed. Then 1-year-old Mary is next. She drowns her, leaves her in the tub, and here comes Noah, 7 years old. He's asking, what is wrong with Sissy? And then he runs. He's running away from his mom. He knows something is wrong. Then Andrea snatches him up and drowns her 5th child to death. I can't even tell you how mentally gone this woman was. She was actually one of 5 kids in her family. How ironic is that? But in all seriousness, she suffered through some things in her lifetime. By the time she was 17, she suffered really bad depression and even considered after meeting her husband Rusty, and never really resurfaced until she was 4 kids deep into her marriage. Rusty had found her shaking and biting her fingers one night, and by the next day she had pills. Within 1 month, she was hospitalized like 4 times for suicidal outbreaks, holding a knife to her throat at one point, begging to die. Her doctors told her having another baby is not smart. You're not all the way there yet. We can't trust that you'll be a safe guardian. And here we are in 2000, 7 weeks after the doctors warned her, and she is pregnant with her final baby, Mary. Nearly 1 year after that, Andrea's dad passed away, and she is right back to ground zero. She stopped taking her medication. She refuses to feed her baby. She's mutilating her body and binge reading the Bible. 1 month before murdering her kids, she had actually filled up the tub, planning to kill them then, but for some reason she didn't. Doctors had just thought that she was trying to attempt on herself again. After getting arrested and awaiting trial in jail, she had actually admitted to a psychiatrist there that she had been wanting to kill her kids for 2 years now. She literally told them that they were developing improperly, they weren't righteous towards God, they were doomed from the beginning because she was evil, so they were going to perish in the fires of hell anyway. The oldest was 7. I really get that kids are bratty, but like killing them for it? After 6 years in jail, they found her not guilty in 2006 because of insanity. So now she's being held in a low security mental hospital in Kerrville, Texas.
A man escaped from prison only to hand himself back in 38 years later. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and I just had to share this wild story with yous. 28-year-old Charles Johnson was convicted of forgery in 1893. This came after he took out a big loan using his mum's name, details and signature. For this, he would be sentenced to 2 years in prison, and he was incarcerated in the Nebraska State Penitentiary. During his time incarcerated, Charles was considered a model prisoner. He became a trustee and was given a job in the engine room, which was actually outside of the prison. 17 months into his sentence, Charles had had enough. Instead of gritting his teeth and persevering through the last couple of months, he decided that he was going to escape. So one day in 1894, he did just that. While working in the engine room, while no one was watching, he slipped out of the door and walked away to his freedom. He began going by the alias J.E. Peterson, and the police were never able to track him down. So I guess he must never have contacted any of his friends or his family. He must have completely started again. He would go on to get married, having children, and then eventually having grandchildren, and he never got in trouble with law enforcement ever again. He was just a regular Joe. In 1930, Charles's beloved wife passed away after she had been suffering from an illness for a very long time. After her death, he really started to sit back and reflect on his life, all the good he had done and the bad he had done, and his prison escape was always in the back of his mind. At 66 years old, he decided that he was was going to go and travel the world. In 1931, he ended up in Japan, and one day while he was sailing in a boat off the coast of Japan, the boat would capsize, flinging him into the water. He managed to swim to a rock where he clung on for his life and began to pray. He prayed to God for forgiveness, he prayed to God to save him, and he promised God that if God did save him, he would go back to the prison, hand himself in and pay his debts. Miraculously, only moments after making that promise, a boat discovered Charles and pulled him on board, saving him. Keeping his promise, Charles would make his way from Japan to Nebraska, where he would walk into the prison that he escaped from 38 years earlier. He was readmitted back into the prison and given a job in the vegetable room.
In Spain, they say if you hear a sack dragging after midnight, it's already too late. El hombre del saco, also known as the sack man, is known as an old man who carries a sack around and kidnaps children. He is ugly, skinny, and eats the children he kidnaps. But don't worry, this only happens to children who misbehave. In 1910 in Spain, some believed that drinking the blood of a child and taking their body fat and putting it out to another person's body would cure tuberculosis. There was a man named Francisco Ortega, and he had just been diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he was desperate to find a cure. He went to see a healer named Augustina Rodriguez, and she sent him to a man named Francisco Leona, who was a barber and a healer. The man told him he could cure him for 3,000 reales, which would be equivalent to $13,000 today. Francisco then went to Augustina's son, Julio, and told him that in order to find a cure, they needed to find a child. On June 27th of 1910, Francisco used chloroform on 7-year-old Bernardo Gonzalez Barra and placed him in a sack. He was then taken out of the sack and stabbed. Francisco then mixed Bernardo's blood with sugar and drank it. Bernardo was alive for all of this, and eventually he was taken to a place called Las Posicas, and his skull was smashed with a rock. Bernardo's body fat was then removed so they could use it on Francisco's body. Once they were done, they hid Bernardo's body in a crevice with herbs and stones. Once Julio found out that he wasn't going to be paid for any of this, he went to the authorities and told them that he found the body of a small child while he went bird chasing. Once authorities arrived, they took Francisco Leona, the healer, into custody. During trial, all 3 men got in trouble and received death sentences. Since then, many have been afraid of encountering El hombre del saco.
This 14-year-old boy is one of the UK's most dangerous killers. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Joe Galen. Today's case takes place in Bury, Manchester in 2006. Joe is an 11-year-old, very well-liked, charismatic boy who loved everything to do with football and had cystic fibrosis. On the 1st of March, he receives a handwritten note from 14-year-old Michael Harmer, who had told Joe that this was a note from the deputy head teacher. The note instructed Joe that he had to go home with Michael that night, that he was his mentor, and that his mum was going to pick him up from there after school. Joe had mentioned the note to teachers who had questioned it, not believing that it had actually came from the deputy head teacher. This teacher was partway through advising Joe not to do it when the fire alarm went off, disrupting the conversation and forcing all the students to evacuate the school. Michael had in fact fabricated the note in order to lure Joe back to his house. He had developed some sort of obsession and fascination with Joe, and maybe experienced some sort of jealousy towards Joe. Michael was quite the opposite of him. He was very reserved, very quiet, and he didn't really have any friends. When the boys arrived at Michael's house after school, he proceeded to make sexual advances towards Joe. Joe rejected these advances, calling Michael gay, and threatened to tell everyone in school what Michael had just tried to do. Filled with rage and probably feeling extremely embarrassed, Michael picked up a frying pan and proceeded to bludgeon Joe with it. He whacked Joe a total of 5 times with so much force that it had broken his eye socket and broke the pan. After retrieving 2 knives, Michael would go on to stab poor Joe 16 times. Some wounds were up to 8 inches long, and he had been stabbed in the neck, face, and his upper body.
After murdering Joe, Michael dragged his body downstairs, hauled him into a bin and began to wheel him to nearby Whitehead Park. This was at around 4:30 p.m. Back at their home, the parents of Joe began to worry. He wasn't the type of boy who would wander about after school. He was very rarely late, and he needed medical treatment for his cystic fibrosis that without could be detrimental. They knew that something wasn't right, and at 5:30 p.m. they contacted the police and reported Joe missing. Thankfully, the police took this serious immediately and launched a search. Meanwhile, Michael had gone home and was completely normal. He'd ate his tea, done his homework, had a bath, and then proceeded to sleep soundly in the bedroom where only hours prior he had committed murder. The search went on late into the night. However, it wasn't until the next day, at around 10:30 a.m, that the body of 11-year-old Joe Geelan was found by a police dog hidden under some debris. It was clear to the officers that found him that he was the victim of a vicious killing, thus turning the case from a missing person to a murder. People who were with Joe the day before or had any information on him whatsoever were all questioned. One of these people included Michael. He admitted that he had seen Joe after school, but that they had only just briefly spoke in the street before going their separate ways. But this didn't sit right with some of the school staff. Michael was changing his story, and then remembering the note, this just didn't add up for the staff. Within an hour of finding Joe's body, Michael is escorted out of the school and is arrested. Initially, he did try to deny any involvement with Joe's murder. However, after a few hours, he made a full confession. A search of his house would find the note that lured Joe to his house, along with several other ones where Michael had wrote his sexual interest in Joe. At Manchester Crown Court on the 16th of October, Michael pled guilty to murder and was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 12 years to serve. This was later uplifted to 15 years. In 2016, he made a plea to have his sentence reduced, which was denied. He was able to apply for parole in March 2021, but I couldn't find anywhere if he had or if he has been released or not. Next week will mark 17 years since poor Joe was callously killed. He was a happy, bright young boy who did not deserve the end he was met with.
Did this mum save her children from a horrific attack, or was she a cold-blooded killer? It was the evening of the 13th of December 2001 in Iowa when police got a frantic phone call. Tracy Roberts was on the other end of the line, and she was actually home alone with her 3 kids. These were 11-year-old Bert, Noah aged 3, and 2-year-old Mason. Tracy told the dispatcher this absolutely terrifying tale about how she was just bathing her daughter, minding her own business, and 2 men suddenly broke into her house. Now, she did have a husband at the time, but he had just so happened to be away, I think with work or something. But when officers got to the crime scene, they really couldn't make sense of the situation at all. Firstly, a man was dead on the floor. Tracy said after these 2 men broke in, she suddenly panicked. She ran with her little baby that she was bathing into her son Bert's room, and she gave the baby to Bert, and then suddenly one of the attackers pulled her back and was like choking her, and suddenly she went unconscious. And then apparently Bert, aged 11, was stood there with a baseball bat and like guarded his siblings, and then she regained consciousness again. She said she then ran to her bedroom and grabbed a G. She said she fired it at one of the intruders, and then he was just like lying on the floor. She said the other intruder then just like ran out the house and got away. So who was the man dead in Tracy's house? Well, it just so happened to be her neighbor called Dustin, and he was just 20 years old. So the next steps were kind of like the police needed to confirm Tracy's story. They needed to examine the crime scene and just make sure everything made sense. But it didn't. So the kids, bless them, were questioned and they did actually back up their mum's story. But when the crime scene investigators took a look at the actual victim, he had multiple G-shot wounds from 2 different weapons. And Tracy kind of had an answer for this. She said that originally she shot him with 1 G and then she realized he was still moving on the floor, so she grabbed a different G and then shot him with that. And she said in the heat of the moment, she didn't even realize that it was Dustin, her neighbor, who she knew really well. The police were like, right, okay, well, we need to try and find intruder number 2. But they couldn't even find any evidence that there was even a second person in the house. And they started wondering if that intruder number 2 even existed. What was weird, though, was an old computer had been taken and carefully placed in Dustin's car that was actually parked really neatly on the driveway. This wasn't like he'd kind of raced up to the house, parked his car outside the house in a hurry. And Tracy's injuries didn't really make sense either. They weren't consistent with being choked. They were more consistent with just self-inflicted wounds. So like I said, Tracy had a husband, but she also had an ex-husband, John. Now, the pair definitely didn't get on and they were in the midst of a big custody battle. She painted this picture that John was this abusive ex and he'd even been abusive to her son. But John told the opposite story. He said Tracy was the one that was abusive. He said she'd previously even threatened him with her G. But what about Tracy's current husband, Michael, who was away at the time? Well, he'd actually been really close with Dustin, the neighbor, and he'd also been apparently abusive to the son, Bert. Apparently allegedly broke his nose in an argument, which is just horrific. Michael denied this, but he did have a history of violence, and the relationship between him and Tracy was also violent. He'd been arrested just the year prior in December 2000 for an incident with Tracy. Michael, though, said that Tracy was the instigator and she'd actually put a bag over his head and tried to choke him. So honestly, this was just a massive big mess. And Tracy had beef with her ex-husband and now she was having beef with her current husband because they were both sort of pointing fingers at each other. The strain was too much and her husband Michael ended up divorcing as well. So she's on divorce number 2. She moved to Nebraska with her kids, and honestly the case kind of just grinded to a halt. And poor Dustin's mum was really left with no answers at this point because she's like, I don't know what to believe. Was he really breaking into somebody's house or was he actually there? Did she invite him in? Did she lure him there? To her it didn't really make any sense because Tracy and Dustin were friends. They were actually pretty close and he used to go around to the family house and help with documents and things. And everyone's concern grew more and more when they realised that 4 of the G shots had actually been fired into the back of his head. So this didn't sound like self-defense at all. So the case was reopened in 2008 and there was even more worrying discoveries. Many people who knew Tracy were saying she was aggressive and manipulative. There was the discovery of a pink notebook from inside Dustin's car. So in this pink notebook was a weird kind of confession type diary entry, I guess. And it was supposedly written by Dustin and it was about being contacted by John, so Tracy's ex-husband, who she had this bitter custody battle with. And the diary entry just seemed a bit forced. It was saying how the ex-husband had contacted Dustin and asked him to kill Tracy. But investigators were really sus about this. There were details in that diary that only Tracy would have known. And the language in that diary entry was almost exactly word for word the exact same language Tracy used to describe her ex-husband. The evidence started piling up and it became pretty obvious that Tracy had set this whole thing up to frame her ex-husband, and Dustin was unfortunately just collateral damage. In her mind, if she could make it look like her ex-husband wanted to kill her, then he would be behind bars and she would win custody. Prosecutors argued that Dustin would often willingly go round to the house after being asked, so that made sense of the neatly parked car and the lack of a struggle at the crime scene. Tracy was eventually found guilty of Dustin's murder and was sentenced to life in prison.
There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now that everybody should be talking about. This is Anna Knezovic. She went missing after temporarily moving to Spain from Florida this month, and the details surrounding her case are bizarre. In January, Anna and her husband David separated after being together for 13 years. They both lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Anna's family said that the divorce was pretty nasty. So to get away and to kind of clear her head, Anna decided to temporarily move to Spain. More specifically, she moved to a luxury apartment in the upscale neighborhood of Salamanca in in Madrid. She originally only rented the apartment there until February 5th, but she vanished on February 2nd, and no one has seen her since. That evening, Anna was in her apartment and had an hour-long conversation with a friend on the phone at around 8:30 p.m. According to the friend, everything seemed normal, and Anna said that she didn't plan on going out that night. But this is where things start to get strange. Later that night, a man in a helmet covering his face was caught on the security cameras at Anna's apartment building. He spray painted 2 security cameras in the front of the building and by an elevator leading outdoors with black paint, disabling them. That night, Anna vanished, and nothing was caught on security footage because of this. The next day, Anna's friend and brother received a string of mysterious texts from Anna's phone that they believe were not from her. The text said that just the day before, she met someone wonderful. It was a man who approached her while she was walking on the street, and she said the connection was amazing and unlike anything she had ever experienced. Anna then said that she was going to a summer house with him, which was about 2 hours outside of Madrid, and that she would be gone for a few days. She said that the phone signal would be spotty, but that she would call them when she got back. But according to Anna's brother and her friend, the texts seemed really disconnected, they didn't sound like Anna at all, and they switched between English and Spanish, almost like they'd been translated from a computer. Those who know Anna say that she would never do something like this. Not only is it extremely unsafe, but Anna would never just run off with someone that she just met. On top of that, the friend that received those text messages was the same friend that was on the phone with Anna the night she disappeared. And according to her, Anna never mentioned anything about a man or running off with him that night.
I saw an apartment that I loved yesterday. So hopefully it will be mine. I don't know. And now I'm on my way to see another one, and everything's doing great. I'm feeling actually really good. I'm going on Monday to Barcelona with a friend of mine. It's just a day trip. We're going and then we're coming back. She's very excited about it.
Anna has not been seen or heard from since, and she was officially reported missing on February 5th. Adding to the mystery is the fact that Anna was supposed to catch a train to Barcelona with a friend on the 5th, yet she never showed. Authorities in Spain were able to get into her apartment a week after she was reported missing, but found no signs of a break-in or any signs of a crime. According to Anna's neighbor, her lights were still on at 1 a.m. the morning of the 3rd, but if she was actually in her apartment at that time is unknown. What's also unclear is if there's any connection between Anna's disappearance and the unknown man who spray painted the security cameras, although to me that does not seem like a coincidence. Anna's family has stated that the separation between her and her estranged husband David was pretty nasty, adding that there was a substantial amount of money on the line to be split up between the two, and that did not make David happy. While they were married, the two owned 3 different corporations together that provided technology and support for South Florida businesses. But right after the two separated, David traveled back to his hometown in Serbia and was not in Spain or around Anna when she disappeared. As of right now, David is not a person of interest or suspect in the case, and he has been cooperating with authorities. Police in Madrid and Florida have since launched their own investigations into Anna's disappearance, but she remains missing to this day. Her family has since created a GoFundMe to help hire a private investigator, so I'll share that here. If you have any information about the disappearance of Anna Knezovic, please contact the number on the screen.
This is the story of Tanya Thomas. Tuesday, May 15th, 2012, around 4:30 a.m., 17-year-old Pebbles and 15-year-old Jax ran across the street to their neighbor's house, banging on the door trying to get in. When he opened the door, he seen both of the teens covered in blood, and they said that their mother had shot them. As the neighbor was calling 911, the teen's mom, 33-year-old Tanya Thomas, was standing in the doorway holding a gun, very calmly asking her children to come back inside. The neighbors begged for the children not to go, but they went anyway. The two went back and joined their other 2 siblings, 12-year-old Jules and 13-year-old Jazz. Minutes after the kids were back inside, the neighbor reported he heard multiple gunshots. 17-year-old Pebbles tried to escape once again, but she didn't get very far. She made it to the neighbor's yard and collapsed. The EMTs attempted to rush her to the hospital, but she died en route. Tanya standing in the doorway with gun in hand. Seeing them take away her daughter, she slams the door. Minutes later, police hear a ray of gunfire, which left SWAT team no choice but to bust in the back door. Once SWAT made it in, they seen it was too late. Tanya and the remainder 3 of her children were dead in the back of the house. Tanya had a self-inflicted gun wound to her head. A friend of Tanya shared a text message from her saying, "Cremate me with my children." 1 month earlier, in April, the record showed that the police were called 3 times to Tanya's home. Easter Sunday, 15-year-old Jack threw his bicycle through the house window. The very next day, Tanya attempted to wake him up for school, and he kicked and punched her in the face, which she defended herself and hit him back, and they ended up tussling, and the police were called. The week after that, the police did a welfare check on the family. The neighbors said that the kids were hoodlums. They would light firecrackers. They would torture the dogs in their neighborhood. So to me, it seemed like maybe Tanya was fed up or tired. It was also brought up that the children's father, Joe Johnson, which is all of their last names, used to verbally abuse the mother and physically abuse the mother in front of the children. So it seemed like a very toxic household over there. And maybe Tanya Thompson maybe she was fed up, maybe she was tired. That's no excuse for murdering all 4 of your children, but what do y'all think?
The fact that this was the last person that 11-year-old Audrey Cunningham saw before she was killed is horrific. On the morning of February 15th, Audrey disappeared while on her way to the bus stop in Livingston, Texas. She was last seen at around 7 that morning, and the last person that she was with was 42-year-old Don Stephen McDougall. Don was a family friend of the Cunninghams who lived in a trailer behind their home, and he would occasionally walk Audrey to the bus stop or even take her to school if she missed the bus. Audrey lived with her dad, her grandparents, and a few other family members on that same property as Don. After she failed to show up to school and after missing the bus, Audrey was reported missing by school officials and a massive search was launched. Very early on, Don was really vocal about being innocent, and he made it a point to join in on the search efforts for the little girl. He was seen going to multiple houses in the community, knocking on doors and asking if anybody had seen her. He even reportedly took to Facebook, commenting on posts about Audrey being missing, saying things like, quote, "I'm not guilty." But just one day after Audrey was reported missing, Don was arrested on an unrelated assault charge, and according to police, he immediately became a person of interest in Audrey's disappearance. The following day, police found Audrey's backpack near the Lake Livingston Dam, and it was at this point that they started investigating Don's cell phone data and local surveillance footage to piece together 3 different locations of interest, which included the Trinity River just 10 miles from Audrey's home. And sadly, on February 20th, 5 days after she disappeared, a dive team found Audrey's body in the Trinity River under the US Highway 59 bridge in Livingston. She was found underwater, tied to a large rock with rope that was linked back to similar rope that was found in Don's car. Her cause of death is still undetermined pending autopsy, but police do believe that she was murdered the same day that she disappeared. Don was still in jail when Audrey's body was found. He has since been charged with capital murder and is now being held without bond. This is so upsetting for many reasons, but the main reason is because Don has a very lengthy criminal history dating all the way back to the early 2000s. In 2008 alone, Don was convicted on 2 child enticement charges. This is the definition of that for anyone wondering, and for those charges he was sentenced to 2 years, yet he was released early. And on top of that, for some reason, he wasn't required to register as a sex offender. Multiple people that knew Don, including a former boss and a coworker, said that he was a really bad person. He threatened to kill his old boss over $50 and tried to stab his old coworker after he slashed all of his tires. Don's most recent conviction was a harassment charge in 2020 in which he spent a week in jail for. According to police, Audrey's dad was reportedly aware that Don had a criminal background, but that he didn't know about the former charges involving children. Multiple different people let Audrey down. This is not the outcome that anybody was hoping for, but hopefully now Don will be charged accordingly and there will be some justice for Audrey.
The internet can be so scary for so many reasons, but I bet when you think about that, you don't think, yeah, because people could literally plan out a murder online. Because you would imagine that people wouldn't do that, but you would be wrong. Today, we're talking about the horrifying story of Kimberly Proctor. Real quick, before we get started, I feel like trash, and I look it too. I'm sure you can tell. I don't know what it is. If anyone has any idea what this could be, honestly, please help me. But every single weekend, like clockwork, I just feel horrible. I don't feel like doing anything. I'm so tired. I feel sick to my stomach. I feel nauseous. I feel what I would imagine morning sickness would feel like if you were pregnant. Like when this all started, I was like, am I pregnant? Because I felt that horrible, but no. And I just it's so bad. But as soon as it's Monday, totally normal. Totally fine, not sick at all. Saturday and Sunday, I cannot be any other way than horizontal because I just feel so ill. I don't know what it is. It's weird. And it's honestly really inconvenient too because I have things to do, but anyway. Kimberly Proctor was born and raised in Langford, British Columbia, which is located in Canada. She was raised with so much love. She was such a happy little girl who adored animals. She was raised to be kind, friendly. She grew up to have a very caring personality. However, along with all of that, she did have some struggles. Kimberly had ADHD, and from a very young age, that proved to have a big impact in her life, especially when it came to learning in a school setting. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it affects how your brain develops and functions, and for Kim, she struggled a lot with being easily distracted. Because of that, Kimberly's parents made the decision to move her to Pacific Secondary, an alternative school where she could get the one-on-one support that she really needed. It was in that school where Kimberly made friends with a boy named Cruz and a boy named Cam. A little bit of background on Cruz. Cruz had a bit of a history acting out. He didn't do anything extreme, but he had been in trouble before for and theft, stealing things, etc. And his history of acting out did have a lot to do with the household that he was raised in. Horrible home life, unfortunately. He wasn't shown any kind of love as a child. In fact, he was quite neglected. His father wasn't in the picture by the time that Cruz became a teenager, and that is because Cruz himself decided that he didn't want to have any kind of relationship with his father. Because Cruz's father was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the kidnapping, essay, and the murder of a 16-year-old girl. Yeah, terrible guy. It was when Cruz was in 5th grade that he became best friends with a boy named Cam, and their friendship dynamic was very much Cruz thought that he was above everyone else. He was a bad kid, but he was very disrespectful, very careless, very ignorant, but he thought that he was the best guy ever. Cam, on the other hand, like Kim, also struggled with ADHD, and I'm not mentioning that to say that having ADHD is a negative thing at all. I'm just saying that that is something that Cam and Kim had in common. But because of that, Cruz kind of took control over Cam. He was kind of the leader / mastermind in their little friendship, and Cam would do anything that Cruz told him to do. Cam also came from a very rough home life, and because of that, the two boys bonded over it because they felt like they were the only two that could really understand each other. And as you can imagine, they were terrible influences on each other, but they did everything together. When they were around 14 to 15 years old, the two of them would skip school. They would take substances in the middle of the day just because they could. They would spend their entire days online, surfing through the internet, specifically on pages that children should not be on. And when they did go to school, they were just bullies. They would put the other students down. They would act out verbally and physically, and they were just honestly not good news. And those were the two boys that became Kimberly's close friends at this new school. When the three of them were not together, they were messaging on MSN. It's an online messaging website. Is it a website? I think it's a website. It's just basically like online texting, and you can have different chat rooms open at the same time. So Cruz would chat to Cam, Cam would chat to Kimberly, Kimberly would chat to Cruz and Cam. They were all besties, but they would also all talk separately as well. And something about Cruz and Cam is that they were both interested in Kim romantically, and they would both be very flirty with her on MSN. Cam liked Kim more, but Kim had more of an interest in Cruz, and they would be up late at night chatting online, flirting. Cruz opened up to Kim and told her that he felt like he could be more open with her than he could be with other people because he trusted her. He said, quote, "I can't lie to you. It makes me feel too guilty. Normally I can, but you make me feel very honest for some reason," end quote. Kind of a weird way to flirt. Like, you make me not want to be a liar. Thank you. Love you. On one occasion, Cruz said to Kim, quote, "You're too good, Kim. You trust in people too much," end quote, which is chilling and disgusting when you find out what happened next. So both Cruz and Cam would flirt with Kim a lot, but they were also very mean to her. It honestly seemed like the two of them just used Kim for their entertainment. Like, in her head, they were all best friends, but in the boys' heads, it was clear that they had no respect for her at all. They would be so incredibly mean to her, and I mean like mean. Like, they would bully her about her insecurities, and because they were friends, they knew her real insecurities. They knew what her insecurities were, and they would go at her in ways that they knew would hurt her. They would make fun of her for things she did. They would tell her that she didn't matter, that she wasn't important, and they even once told her that her pet bunny passing away was her fault. They were rubbing it in her face, telling her that it was all her fault. And then they would be like, "Oh my god, you can't take a joke." Like, I know exactly that you know what kind of boys I'm talking about, the ones that are like straight up so mean to you, and then they're like, "Oh, take a joke." You're a bully, dude. It was weird, but the thing is that Cruz and Cam were weird. They were so weird, and in their own time, when they were together, they would do weird things. For once, they were always on substances, always. That was like their favorite hobby. They experimented with drinking blood and drinking each other's bodily fluids. And when they chatted to each other on MSN, they would often talk about their fantasies, and that would include things such as SA, and bondage. Anyway, moving on. One day, Cruz messaged Kim online and asked her what her plans were for the following day, asked her what she was up to. Kim said she didn't have anything going on the next day other than babysitting at 3 p.m. and Cruz responded and said, quote, "I'm bored and was looking for someone to chill with. I also wanted to apologize," end quote. Cruz tells Kim that he wanted to meet up with her in person and apologize. He wanted to apologize and explain why him and Kim had been so mean to her the last few weeks, and he suggested that they meet up the next day in person before she has to babysit at 3 o'clock. And Kim says sure, but she brings up that this kind of seems a little bit random. She thinks that Cruz reaching out to her randomly trying to schedule a meetup in person is kind of out of nowhere, and she tells him that she would feel less weird about this entire thing if he would just hop on the phone with her first. And they do. Cruz and Kim hop on a call, but what Kim didn't know was that Cruz added Cam to their phone call, so it was a three-way phone call with Kim, Cruz, and Cameron. But Kim wasn't even aware that Cameron was on the phone listening in on their conversation. During that call, Cruz and Cameron were messaging each other online, and here are some of the things that were said. From Cruz, quote, "I'm going to rip her nose ring out and burn it. Burn her flesh. I'm not right away." From Cam, "Why not keep her bound and alive?" From Cruz, "That's what I'm gonna do, but I need to get her first and possibly." From Cam, "LOL, try quickly." So, from those messages and with what happens next, it is clear that what those two boys were chatting about was their plan to end the life of their friend, Kimberly Proctor. Their plan was for the three of them to all meet up the next day. The two boys came up with a code word that Cruz would say to let Cam know that it was time for their attack to begin. The morning of March 18th, 2010, Cruz and Kim had plans to meet up. That afternoon, Kim was supposed to babysit at 3 p.m., but she told Cruz that she would meet up with him and Cam before that so they could all talk and they could apologize for whatever they wanted to apologize for, and then she could go babysitting at 3 p.m. Around 10:30 a.m., the three of them met up and made their way back to Cruz's house. Very shortly after arriving at the house, Cruz said the code word and the boys attacked the very person that they called their best friend. They were kicking her, forcing themselves onto her as they tied her ankles and her wrists, continuing to push her around. Cruz grabbed a ball of socks and stuffed it in Kim's mouth, which he then wrapped in duct tape so that she could not breathe. For the next couple hours, those boys did anything and everything they could do to inflict pain onto Kim. That included with different objects, different household objects that they decided to use as weapons. The two of them then SA'd and Kimberly Proctor. When they were finished and Kim was very weak but still alive, Cruz and Cam moved her body to a freezer in Cruz's garage, put her in there still tied up, closed the lid, and left her in there overnight. After Kim was placed in the freezer, and probably while she was still alive, Cruz ran to his computer and sent her one final message. It was meant to be his way of trying to get an alibi, I guess. Cruz messaged Kim online and said, "Hey, are you done babysitting yet?" Trying to obviously make it seem like he had no idea what was really going on. And because Cruz got online to message Kim, one of his other friends messaged him asking him for help on something. Cruz didn't respond, and his friend obviously was frustrated, messaged him again and said, "Dude, speak," trying to get his attention. And finally, 8 minutes later, Cruz replied to that friend saying, "Sorry, the freezer was jumping around." No explanation, no follow-up. It's disgusting and vile knowing what we know he was doing. The next morning, Cruz and Cam opened the freezer to find Kim Proctor no longer alive. She had lost her life due to suffocation because that ball of socks they had put in her mouth and taped shut. The boys put Kim's body into a hockey bag. They carried that bag to a bus stop and hopped on a bus for the Galloping Goose Trail. Once they were there, they made their way into the woods and underneath a bridge. They doused the bag in fuel and lit it on fire. And listen to this. After they were done, Cruz went back to his house and spent the remainder of the day at home with a girl that he had been dating in the same house where he had just committed murder the night prior. And Cam went to go have brunch with his mother and his grandmother. After lighting his friend's deceased body in flames, he went out for a nice meal with his grandma. It did not take long at all for Kim's mother to report her missing, for law enforcement to start looking for Kim, and for them to find her body underneath that bridge. The body was in such a horrible state that they had to wait until they got dental records back to confirm that it was Kimberly Proctor, but it was. And the news of her death left the town in shock. It was devastating news for everyone, especially for Kim's family and friends, for her mother. They were left brokenhearted and confused because it made absolutely no sense for anyone who would want to do something like this to anyone, let alone to Kim. It made absolutely no sense that anyone would want to harm Kim in the way that she was harmed. The investigation began and Cruz and Cam were questioned by police, of course, because they were Kim's closest friends. And all they said was that they did see Kim earlier that day before she went missing, but they claimed that she hung out with them for a little bit and then ended up leaving to go babysitting at 3. We know obviously that that wasn't the case and she never made it to babysitting, but that was their side of the story, and that was that for now. As the town was still in shock from Kim's murder and the news of her death was being talked about left and right, Cruz started to spiral. Paranoia set in. He was suddenly hyper aware of every digital breadcrumb he may have left behind. He wanted to talk about what he did, but he didn't know who to talk about it with or where to talk about it that would be considered a safe place to speak about what he had done. MSN Messenger now felt too risky for Cruz, but World of Warcraft. He figured that would be somewhere where he could chat and leave no trace. What an idiot, right? 5 days after the murder, on March 23rd, Cruz messaged the girl he had been seeing on MSN. And he told her that he had something urgent to share, but it had to be over World of Warcraft, not here, not on MSN. Once they were logged onto there and safe to speak about anything, he told her everything. He confessed to murdering his friend Kim Proctor with the help of his best friend Cam. He even sent her links to news articles as proof that what he was saying was real. Thankfully, it wouldn't be long until the police got a hold of those messages, because they were keeping a very close eye on Cruz and Cam. The police just always felt like there was something off about them and that they were hiding something. And now they had a full written confession from Cruz admitting to murdering Kim Proctor with the help of Cam. Kimberly Proctor tragically lost her life March 18th of 2010. On Friday, June 18th of 2010, Cruz and Cam were arrested for her murder. When Cam finally confessed to the cops, he described ending the life of Kimberly while laughing. He was saying this while he was laughing. He said it was, quote, the biggest adrenaline rush you could ever have, end quote. The 2 boys pled guilty and they were sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Those 2 boys felt no remorse at all. They were making fun of the entire situation the entire time. They even talked about how they should do it again because it was so easy. They talked about how they should do it again to another girl. Kimberly Proctor is and will always be remembered and loved by all of her family and friends. They miss her dearly. She was a very loved, sweet girl who didn't deserve this at all. Nobody does, but that is all I have for today's story. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to Kim's story. Again, apologies that I look so gross because I literally feel so gross, but I will see you in my next video. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day, make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.